Deirdre. I'm in recovery from chaos creating and codependency. And yeah, I'll share today about creating love and not chaos, and the ways that God does that in me, and then the ways that I can do that in my relationships with other people. So as I've been in the LifeLab program and around AA, then the thing that I've learned and internalized is that the life of recovery is one in which I'm recovering a close relationship with God that leads me to a relationship with other people. And it's a gift that God gives me with grace as I choose to maintain my connection with Him and with other people. And the with other people part of that struck me a week and a half ago. I was just sitting and thinking about not much, and I was like, oh, like in LifeLab, to love God is to love other people, and to love others is to love God. And if that's true, then if the life of recovery is a life lived in obedience to God, and God's will mostly has to do with helping other people and serving them to be of maximum service, then most of what I have to pay attention to in my life is the question, like, is this action or is this thought loving to my fellow human beings? Like, that's kind of the grid that a lot of it gets to be put through. And that's what we get in LifeLab, in the big book. The beginning of the 12 steps has a lot to do with you and God. And as you move through them, it gets more and more related to other people in relationship with you and with God. There's resentment inventories, there's amends, there's forgiveness, there's daily check-ins to see how you're doing in these places of like resentment and fear and guilt and shame. There's keeping short accounts. There's like not choosing out of self-will and being our own boss and choosing to be under God's authority and like being His servant, an employer. And it's all helping our relationship with other people and therefore also with God, or it's helping our relationship with God and therefore with other people. Like, it all goes together. And one of the places that this was obvious to me is on page 84 of the big book, when we're talking about making amends in step 9. And it says, if we are painstaking about this phase of our development, we will be amazed before we are halfway through. We're going to know a new freedom and a new happiness. We will not regret the past nor wish to shut the door on it. We will comprehend the word serenity, and we will know peace. No matter how far down the scale we have gone, we will see how our experience can benefit others. That feeling of uselessness and self-pity will disappear. We will lose interest in selfish things and gain interest in our fellows. Self-seeking will slip away. Our whole attitude and outlook upon life will change. Fear of people and of economic insecurity will leave us. We will intuitively know how to handle situations which used to baffle us. We will suddenly realize that God is doing for us what we could not do ourselves. And so that is all like a product and result of totally surrendering myself to God to do with as He wills. And it directly relates to how I relate with other people. And it's actually, this is a pretty obvious thought. And it's pretty simple, but it just didn't click for me really, like all the way through until a couple of weeks ago. And thinking about it in those terms, so the question, is this a loving decision or is this not a loving decision, has been really helpful. It helps me make decisions about what I should buy, what I should not buy, what I do with my free time, what do I not do with my free time, how do I show up in conversations with people, what sorts of books I read, when do I read them, when do I go to bed, and it makes actually a lot of things a lot clearer. And it's been really helpful. And all through my recovery journey, the place that complicates things is as a codependent and chaos creator. It gets tricky to know what is love and what is not love, because things that can look like love are actually only self-serving. And some things that would look selfish to me actually are love. And so I'm still sorting it all out in my mind. So that's what I'm gonna do today, is kind of like talk through some of the thoughts that I've had about it over the last few weeks. So I was the oldest child. I grew up um, four younger siblings, and I had a hard time relating to my peers when I went to elementary school in grade 4. And so they were hard to figure out how to relate to, but I knew how to make the adults in my life happy, like the teachers. I could help out with the younger kids. I could be a bus patroller. I could help with pizza. Like, there was so many opportunities to serve and to feel stable because I was making adults in my life happy. And so I did that all through elementary school. I minimized the amount of time I had to spend with people who I didn't know how to relate to, and maximized the amount of time that I could feel helpful and useful. And then when I went to university and invested more in my faith, I discovered a whole Christian context. Really happy to have me serve and use my gifts and spend my energy taking care of other people. And it's all over the good book. Jesus sacrificed everything he had to the point of death. And like very important saintly people throughout history have given up family and health and wealth for the sake of being faithful to God. And so, therefore, should I not also live a life of self-sacrifice and service to other people in the same way? And I went for it. I was like, yes, this is great. And I wound up restless, irritable, discontent, mentally ill, unable to stop doing things or stop thinking things. My mind was never at peace. My body was never still. I was not able to quiet myself before the God who I served and enjoy things too wonderful for me. And I remember trying to do meditation for the first time and just needing to hang on to the sides of my chair so I wouldn't get up and go do something else, like anything else. And I'm like, well, what's missing? Like, how Jesus managed this, people throughout history have managed this, like people who've done AA have managed this. How do I give freely of myself without being codependent or creating chaos? And I think what I've come to learn is that a lot of it has to do with my internal motivations and the results internally, and also for the people who I'm trying to serve and love and connect with. Codependency and chaos creating owes a lot to selfishness and individualism. Like, I get to do what I want, when I want, how I want, without reference to other people, without reference to God, so that I feel safe and secure, and convinced that I'm doing this for altruistic reasons. And what I end up doing is playing God for God's sake. And it doesn't turn out any better than when I play God for obviously not God's sake. For me, it looked like a lot of things, but it chiefly looks like investing more deeply than appropriate in relationships with people I mentored, because it felt good how much they needed me and how much they affirmed me and how important I was in their lives. I felt special and important. I even felt heroic and saintly sometimes because I was doing God's work. I was helping people nobody else would help. I was there for them when no one else was there for them. But this feeling of pride was just a sign that I was bolstering up my ego, and a sign that I was trying to take God's place in their lives because I didn't trust him to give me the affirmation I needed, and I didn't trust him to give them the thing they needed in his power and in his wisdom and in his timing instead of mine. Also, what it looked like was doing kind things for people, hoping that they would give me what I think is an appropriate amount of gratitude or recognition, and then feeling disappointed if my efforts are not acknowledged the way that I wanted them to be. And that's playing God, and that's selfishness, because that's me hoping for and expecting praise that should only go to God, who is the giver of all good gifts. It also looked like not being able to say no when people ask me for help, because I would feel judged or worthless or unworthy saying no. And I'd also feel weak. I would feel like I ought to be able to always meet any need that is brought to me, and able to say yes to more and more things. But that's once again selfishness, and it's once again trying to play God. Like the only person who can be all things to all people that they need at all times is God. He's got that power, he's got that capacity. I just don't. And when I try to be that, then I end up letting people down and letting myself down. Now, all of these things that I would do as someone creating chaos, they all produce and maintain the resentment and dishonesty and selfishness and fear, the things that we're looking out for in step 10 as we do our daily inventories. And eventually I would resent the person that I was trying to help because they would take up all of the time that I ever had in my mind or in my life. And I resent people who don't respond to my kindness the way that I want them to. And I fear being rejected. I fear being less important to people than they are to me. And this all feeds chaos in my mind and in my life. I think, how do I solve this problem? How do I solve that problem? How do I fit 5 hours worth of activity into 3 hours of time? And I overcommit, I bail on people, I overcommit, I show up late to things, I overcommit, I double book myself, I lie awake at night thinking and thinking and thinking, and how will I do all the tasks that I've set for myself? And my mind is always chaotic and never stable and never at peace. And I hate it. I hate how this feels, but also I kind of like it because it shows how necessary and important and wanted I am. It helps me know, yes, you are like God. You are God. And even like you get older, you get less energy. At least some people do. I do. And I still run my life right up to the edge of my limits and try to do as much as possible and give as much as possible so that I still live in that chaos land that comes from acting as God and acting for my own benefit, because it numbs the resentment and the selfishness and the fear and the guilt that I otherwise feel. But it is chaos and it is not love. Like it depends on using other people for my benefit. And for years, as someone growing up in the North American church, I was taught that loving God is a private and an individual affair, done mostly by reading more of the Bible and praying more on your own and following the rules that God has for us. And I liked reading and I liked time alone and I liked following the rules. So I was like, great, this is a good system. But as I've done LifeLab, then I've learned that loving God is actually a deeply interpersonal affair. Like it's connected to how you love other people. And to love God is to love people made in his image. And this actual love leads to like serenity and not to chaos, peace and not like frantic activity. And this has been really beautiful to see. To love people is not to use them to bolster my ego or numb my pain. To love people is to approach them free of resentment and fear and selfishness and dishonesty, with clarity, with like the ability to listen to them, to listen to God at the same time, instead of a mind full of chaos, thinking about the next 16 things I have to do once they leave my presence, or full of fear, thinking about like what they will say about me or think about me when I've left them. And not demanding something that only God can give me, either affirmation or respect or attention or security. I can just be there, be present, expecting God to be at work, asking him what words to use, what things to do, and depending on his wisdom instead of my own. And that's love, like that's peace, instead of chaos. And I'm now able to show up to people in that way, instead of a chaos creating kind of way. I find that I'm free of the need to be involved in every single decision or every single important conversation that people I love are having, particularly people I mentor. because God is big. They have other good and wise people in their lives. They're on a journey. I don't have to be in the middle of it at all times. I don't have to try to cram every last teaching opportunity into someone's time with me. I can show up, I can listen, I can pray, I can offer what God sends my way on their behalf. I can speak the truth in love, and I can lead them in God's hands instead of trying to fit everything in my hands and crumbling under the weight. I can be Deirdre sized instead of God sized in anyone's life. I can say no to people. I can say, actually, I can't do that activity because if I tried, I would only be bringing half of myself. And I love you too much to offer half of myself when I could be offering a whole self to you or someone else some other time. I can be free of fear that they'll love me less or appreciate me less if I say no. And I can say yes to the relationships that are important to me. When I was living in chaos creating lands, I would try to be all things to all people, with the result that I was nobody to anybody. And now I'm like, okay, there are relationships that God has clearly called me to these people in this time. And so then I can show up over and over and over again. I can wash the dishes, I can sweep the floor, I can call again, I can check in again. And often, honestly, loving people is really boring. It's a lot of really boring work of showing up over and over, but it feels good and it feels right and it feels peaceful instead of chaos creating, because that's where God has asked me to be, and I trust his judgment over my own. And I don't receive affirmation and stability from people, but sometimes God uses people to give me those things also. And like the relationships where I can show up in God and in true love are very free and very hopeful and really healthy, because I'm sacrificing in love for their sake. They're sacrificing in love for my sake, and we both trust God to meet our needs through the other person or some other way. And that's love like God loves. And the most complicated thing for me, figuring out what is love instead of chaos, is in areas of sacrifice, because a lot of codependency is not having boundaries, and a lot of healing from that is having boundaries. And so there's a part of me that's like, well, if it passes this boundary of unhealthiness or emotional commitment or like activity, then it's not good. But Jesus was not codependent, and he did in fact like sacrifice his life for other people. And so I think it comes down to like, what is God asking me to do? And if God is asking me to, I don't know, like work overtime this week because there are people who need extra attention, then I can do that knowing that's what God asked me to do, and I don't have to do the other things that I was going to do instead. And then my innermost being can be at peace, even if it's a difficult situation or I sleep less than I would have otherwise, because I know that I'm being faithful to God instead of playing God. And I can accept the call to sacrifice in love and accept that God will help me recuperate as I need afterward. That's, I think, a helpful way to think about it, and it requires a lot of effort and like front end discernment and dependence on God again. And it also, I think, as a single person, like if you're married and you have children, you have a lot of really concrete daily opportunities to act in love to other people because they're always underfoot, right? Like they're always there. And so you have a lot of like options all the time, and you can say yes or you can say no, but you'll always get those choices. And so for me, I'm single and I don't have kids. So I have to like choose to put myself in those places where people are underfoot and I have an opportunity to show love to them. And that's also a lot of intentional work. But it's worth it, because to love God is to love other people, and to love other people is to love God. And to be able to do that, you have to be around the people. Like there's no peeking people out of that equation. And I don't regret the sacrifices I make in order to like live with people. I have housemates who are married and they have 2 kids. And I'm in their lives and they're in my life. And I work a job that requires me to be around people a lot of the time and care about them. And as I'm able to be in all those relationships lovingly instead of like in chaos creation land, then life is beautiful and good. And my relationship with God is better and closer as well. And last thing I would say, this is all possible because God is so good. I'm not a perfect example of the chaos-free life or the totally not codependent person, but God is changing my heart through his power and not my own power. I was reading Mark, and this is the story that came to mind when I was thinking about how does this all work? Like, how does God's power actually work? And it's Mark 4:26. He also said, "This is what the kingdom of God is like. A man scatters seed on the ground. Night and day, whether he sleeps or gets up, the seed sprouts and grows, though he does not know how. All by itself the soil produces grain, first the stalk, then the head, then the full kernel in the head. As soon as the grain is ripe, he puts a sickle to it, because the harvest has come." And in my lengthy and wandering and imperfect sort of journey of recovery, that's what God has been doing. There's seed. I scatter it about as I do my devos. I walk with people through the LifeLab course. I do my resentment inventories. I do my daily check-in. And I don't know how, but somehow in all of that process, the grain grows and the seed grows. And then I'm like, oh, look, a harvest. And I can put the sickle to it and reap the benefit of choosing the recovery life with God and to live in love and not in chaos. And that's good. That means I can't play God in my own recovery journey. There's all the other areas of my life I can get away with it if I really try. But in recovery, I can't. It's all dependent on him. And that's the most important thing for me to know. So that's what these days I ask, okay, is this a loving action or is it not a loving action? Am I doing this for God and in God, or am I doing it separate from him? And that's the appropriate grid. Sometimes things I would previously have called unloving are actually the most loving, like to choose rest, to choose to go to bed at a normal time most nights, to rest so that I can go to Bible study later tonight, to read a beautiful book or go for a walk in the park, because as I encounter beauty, I can better choose love and selflessness and courage. Sometimes it is something I would choose to do before, babysit the kids or call a friend or show up with supper at someone's house. But I can choose either thing out of love and out of peace, as opposed to the haze of chaos and shoulds and have-tos and guilts and shame if I do or do not do the thing that I think is right.